started out saying, well, I've got some land here that isn't the best utilized. And so I chose an area here. This was an old pasture that the cattle could go right down into the farm pond and get their water. And it was not being used for anything. It was a little bit too hilly for corn and soybeans. And it had a whole bunch of voluntary trees on it. I also built a house over here, so it wasn't all of this area. But this basically is the area that I dedicated to an orchard. And I started out saying, well, how many trees can fit there? I got a measuring wheel. I highly recommend that you get a measuring wheel because I put miles and miles and miles on a measuring wheel. But this is the area, an overhead aerial photo of it after the first year of orchard went in. I'll give you a little bit of background. I started planting this in 2015. 2016 was a year where I got all the supplies and equipment lined up. 2017, my trees arrived, and this is basically showing what it looks like in the fall of 2017. And so I did put in, as you can see on the sheet, if you follow along, I started with 10-foot rows. So between each row, it's 10 feet. I laid that out. Between the trees is 3 feet. The 3 feet worked for me. The 10 feet did not. In the future years, I'm making it 12 feet between rows. So 10 was a little tight. Yeah. Yes, north-south. Up to the top of the picture is north. Down is south. That's the orientation. That happened to work for me for a hill that was actually going down. You can kind of see in the previous. Let's see if I can go backwards. You can see from these waterways that they're flowing that way, and the same with these. They flow into the pond. So I've got a hill here that actually is going north-south. But that was not, all the academic stuff says, oh yeah, that's the perfect site. But I really don't know if it matters all that much. What really matters, I do think it's important to have your rows north-south. So that was a good point. So I started with 10-foot rows. I'm now doing 12. The 10 is just, it's a little too tight for all the equipment that you're going to go in and everything. And so I think the academics are maximizing how many trees go per acre, but they're just, I don't know, they don't actually run the orchard. And maybe some of the other speakers can tell me what I'm doing wrong. Went out and decided, you're out in a field. This stuff doesn't exist. And so I kind of started driving stakes in the ground to determine this is where I think the trees will end. I was using my measuring wheel to go 10 feet over, put another tree in the ground. I arranged to, allow for the waterways and stuff. You can see that. Here's the waterways. And so I laid everything out. Now, the academics, again, will tell you leave 35 feet buffer from the end of your row and around the edges and everything. But that didn't really work for me. Actually, I needed 55 feet. And I figured that out at least before I actually got the trees in the ground. So I made more adjustments. That's partly why I had things. But the reason for that is that your trellis that you're going to build takes up space. And the 35 feet is an adequate space to turn your tractor around and equipment, but it's not adequate enough if what you're doing is you're burning up a whole bunch of your 35 feet in your trellis. So if you can see here, this is the last tree of the row. 4 feet from that tree, there's an end post that goes out at an angle, and then there's an anchor in the ground, and you get this triangle. And so basically, there's another 25 feet from the end tree to this anchor, and you can't start turning your tractor around until after you've cleared this anchor here. So the real number that I used was 55 feet for measuring from where I thought the last tree would be and making certain that I had enough space. I made some mistakes. I'm going to point out all of my mistakes to you guys so you can learn from me. So I told you I planned on the waterway. The waterway is here, and there's another one over here. This one worked out okay. I was out here staking things in late June, and I thought everything was fine. I knew where the waterway is. The problem is that in the springtime, when I'm running my sprayer through, doing some copper spray early spring, this waterway is really wet, too wet for my tractor and sprayer. And so I have 10 rows here that don't give me enough room. So half the time I'm coming up this way and I can turn around with no problem, but 5 times I come out this row and I have to go all the way down here to turn around here to come back up. And all I had to do was move these trees back a little bit. So that's a mistake, and I encourage you to really know where your waterways are and how wet they get in the spring. And then another mistake that I made, I knew after I'd laid everything out and I had the trees ordered, I went and did some soil samples and was testing for pH, and I knew from that I had a clay area in my orchard. But as you saw from the previous picture, there's all kinds of trees in here. The trees were growing like crazy. So I didn't really care about it. I didn't think it would be a big issue, but it is an issue. I now call it the Great American Desert. In this picture, you can even see a line. You can see this line right here, and this area here is clay. And it is different than the rest of the orchard, and the trees are fine. They're growing, but it is a dry area. When it rains, rain runs off. It doesn't soak in because of the clay. So these trees are smaller. They're stunted. They're not growing as fast. And so I invested the money into trees and trellis in this area, and for the rest of my life, I will get a lower yield in this area. If I were doing this over again, I would skip this and push the trees out into the better soil. So that's two mistakes I made in my layout of the orchard. I also probably should have done it backward this way first. I say, okay, I know how many trees that will fit in my space now. In my case, it was 10,000. I could fit 10,000 trees in the space that I had. How many trees do you want? I didn't ask myself that question first, but in doing the research on the internet, I came upon a bunch of people who said, basically, if you're doing an orchard, you need a full-time laborer for every 15,000 trees in a high-density orchard. And I was building this orchard to keep me busy. So I said, great, I want to be the full-time worker. 15,000 trees would be my ideal orchard. I've got room for 10. And you set this up in Excel because you're going to do a bunch of back and forth and everything. I estimated high how much it would cost me to get the orchard in. I estimated high how much the equipment would cost me. I took exactly what the academics say to plan for your survival rate. They say plan for 10% of your trees that you plant to not make it to production. So I took 90% of the trees that I planted. I estimated a low yield in year 7 of 1 bushel a year, and then estimated a low price. I said, okay, let's throw out $9 a bushel. That got me $81,000 of revenue. Estimated high, how much is it going to cost me to maintain chemicals, bring the harvest in, and stuff. I said $45,000 for that. That got me earnings of $36,000. Return on that $500,000 investment up here, that would be 7.2. It's not terrible, but you have to ask yourself, yes or no, is that good enough for you? It wasn't good enough for me. You're taking a lot of risk. There'll be some years that you're going to get nothing if you get a late frost or hail or something like that. So 7.2 for as much risk as in an orchard wasn't good enough for me, so I kept playing with my spreadsheet, and my end spreadsheet that I was happy with was 14,000 trees, and that's what I'm doing now. So I laid out an orchard for 10,000 trees. I then did the math, decided I wanted 14, and I had to go back out into the orchard and measure out and stake out for more trees. So it'd be best if I had done this first. So another mistake that I made that hopefully you can learn from. Then I know how many trees I need. You go to order trees. I learned that if you're ordering a lot of trees, but yet you're small fry or a new person like I was, the nurseries are like you, but they're not going to make you their highest priority. So it took 2 years, and I wasn't expecting that. I didn't know anything, I guess. But so when I ordered my trees in 2015, I was told in no uncertain terms I'm not getting them until spring of 2017. And but I did talk to the orchardists or the nurseries. I think that they're a really good source of information. They'll spend a lot of time on the phone with you. So do feel free to pick their brains. Steve's going to talk a little bit about varieties and rootstocks. I didn't do anything with it. I basically said I'm doing cider apples, and I wanted so many trees that anything the nurseries would send me, I would take. So I did not choose what cultivars I have or what rootstocks. I basically took whatever the nurseries would send my way. So then after the trees were ordered, I had a little bit of time. I did test the soil, and I got all those trees that were in the way out of the way. And that brought me to the end of year 1. So for year 2, it's all about supplies and equipment. And there's a lot of supplies in an orchard that are not necessarily prevalent around Iowa, so it did take a lot of time for me to figure out where to get certain things. Posts, you need a lot of posts. I'm going to talk a little bit about posts. The posts, I was looking for 14-foot posts because then I could drive them 4 feet into the ground, get below frost line, and still have 10 feet above the ground. 14-foot posts are hard to find. I found sawmills that would get them for me in Pennsylvania, Texas, and Oregon. I did go with the Texas post people. I've got a sheet of suppliers out on the table too. So if you are interested in that and you want to ask questions, my information is there. You can talk to me, and I'll at least get you going on where you can get some of these supplies, and then you can go shopping and try and find them cheaper than me. But you need row posts, as you see on the paper here. The row posts are 14 feet 4 inches, and the end posts are 14-foot 6-inch posts. The row posts I put 30 feet apart, and then I've already measured all my rows, so this is real easy math. How many row posts do I need? I took the length of the rows, divided by 30, but then I added 2, and I'm happy I did that because it occurred to me, I was just adding 2 because I wanted extras in case I needed them. But I did need them because as I was out actually pounding posts and looking at how far they were, I originally started pounding the row posts, which there's a row post here, 30 feet from the end. You need a row post every 30 feet. The end post is going to support the rest of it. And then I determined or discovered that this wire here, the top wire, goes down because my end post is at a slant, and so I don't have a 10-foot wire along the top anymore. And that was too long of a distance for me to have trees that didn't have 10-foot wire. So I started placing extra end posts, just 1 or 2 trees in on the row. And that worked out well for the wire. You need 4 wires. Again, that's simple math. How long are your rows? A lot of academics tell you to put in 5, and I'm happy that I didn't. It was kind of an accident. I first didn't put in 5 because I didn't like the idea of a 2-foot wire. So 10-foot, 8-foot, 6-foot, 4-foot, that's where I stopped. A lot of the academic papers will say go to 2. And I'm kind of like, who wants to be out picking an apple down here? I mean, that seems ludicrous to me. In addition, you want to spray to control the weeds and stuff around the base of the trees. And so you've got spray going down there, and it just seems like 2 would be ludicrous. But now that I've actually got things planted, I'm so happy that I have my wire at 4, because if you're like me, you're walking through the orchard and you see something that needs to be taken care of over there. And the only way to get over there is to go under the wire. And an old man like me can get under the 44-foot wire with no problems. And if I were tripping up on a 2-foot wire in between, I'd be not happy at all. So the other supplies you need, I said wire. You also need some anchors. I've got a better picture of an anchor later on, and everything. You need leader poles. I just used electrical conduit from Home Depot. That worked great. You need some clips to be able to clip those leader poles to the wire, and some ties to tie the trees to it. And I've got a picture of the clips a little bit later as well. So those are your supplies that you basically need to work out. This is what I've got out there. A little bit more information on my handout. And again, if you've got any questions about where I went for supplies, go ahead and ask me. Then I started focusing on equipment. You can buy, you can lease, you can borrow. I tried to lease or borrow as much as I could. I ended up buying more than I had wanted to, but it worked out well for me. On the left, this is a planter from Phil Brown Welding in Michigan. I highly recommend them. Great people there. They'll also spend time on the phone talking to you. I wasn't going to buy a planter. I did learn before I made any mistakes, at least. I was just going to go hire one of those tree guys. They advertise all the time. There's people who will plant trees for you. And what I learned is that they plant CRP bushes, and they plant pine trees, and they plant hardwoods for people who are putting in hardwood lumber areas and everything. And their tree planters go basically 5, 8, maybe 10 inches deep. And these apple trees need to be planted 15 to 18 inches deep. So I luckily discovered that I couldn't hire a tree guy because they didn't have the right equipment for me. So I got my own tree planter. You need a post pounder. Well, I made a mistake on the post pounder too, which I'll talk about later. This is a hydraulic platform, again from Phil Brown. You don't need a hydraulic platform to build your orchard, but I do think it made it a lot easier. And I modified mine. I worked with a fabricator near Solon to put on these wire unwinders on the front and the back of the platform. So this way, when I'm putting that wire along the row, there's 4 wires. I've got 2 wire unwinders in the front, and I've got a kid up on a platform who's just going along with the tractor, pounding in at 10 feet and 8 feet. And I've got another kid walking behind the platform with these 2 wires, and he pounds in at 6 feet and 4 feet. So one guy on the ground behind, one guy on the platform, one pass down to get the wire up. It really worked very, very well. The only problem with it is I was a little bit too, I guess, design-oriented. These 2 in the front, wire doesn't like to unwind from a vertical perspective. And so I had some tangles, a little bit of waste and stuff that I could have avoided if I had just put my front ones on flat like these back ones. So if I were doing this again, I would put the front ones on like that. But that worked out really well for putting the wire up in my trellis. I also bought a sprayer. You don't need a sprayer the first year, obviously, but I was just trying to get everything taken care of during my down year before the trees arrived. This is from Italy, actually. It is a wonderful, wonderful sprayer. It's more expensive than you have to buy, but this really works well, and I love my sprayer. So if you're in the market and you want to find out why I love my sprayer, come talk to me later. Year 3, then. See, we're already on the back of the sheet here. In February, I started going out and recruiting for labor, and I wanted 3 guys to help me, and I was recruiting for college kids. And I learned that college kids don't want to work that hard. So in mid-March, I flipped and went into my local high school, and I found some kids that were willing to help. I had a great crew. It was good. But you do want to line up your labor, and it takes a little bit longer than you might think, because finding kids that want to do, it's basically construction, was not easy. This is the field ready for the trees to come in. So you saw the aerial thing. I have cleared the trees. You can see piles of dead trees around that are ready to be burned. I've tilled last fall, and I planted rye. And so this is just coming up in the spring. It is just springtime, ready for the trees. And then the trees arrived. As you can see, they look like a bunch of sticks. That is what they are. The sticks go into the ground. So that tree planter I showed you earlier just goes along. The sticks are going into the ground, and they're just little whips. The little whips get the blossoms on. The posts are going into the ground. This is when I'll start talking about my mistake with the post pounder. So in the spring, when the ground was wet, these posts were going in pretty well. As time went on, here's more scenes of nice spring post pounding. And then we get into summertime post pounding. And the ground was getting hot. I put the picture over here just showing you can see the progression of the posts that are going in around these little sticky trees here. And as the ground got harder and harder, we kept going slower and slower. Now, when I bought that post pounder, so I needed a post pounder that could handle 14-foot posts, so that eliminated a whole bunch of post pounders. And I also needed one that could also pound posts at an angle. That eliminated more. There were only like 3 that I considered. This one happens to be from a British supplier. And I had an option when I bought it to increase the weight. So it came with a standard weight. It's in metrics, so it was around 600 pounds was the standard weight. And I could upgrade that weight to around 950 pounds. And I talked with as many people as I could, and they all said the 600 pounds should be fine. And the year between doing this and then the next time, I upgraded my weight. Cost me a lot more to upgrade the weight after buying the post pounder, so I should have done that the first time. And that extra weight just made all the difference in the world for me. This is a terrible picture, but this is where we get to the rest of the process. So after pounding the posts and putting in the end rows, you put on the wires. I've already kind of talked about how that works. This shows you the leader poles Again, that's just electrical conduit, nothing big. You can kind of see some of these clips that you can that are holding the poles to the wire. And then down here, you can see the ties that you tie the trees to. So I've done all of that. This basically is done. If you're looking at my sheet, you see those two things that say spray and mow at the bottom. That's what I didn't do. There's nobody else who's going to give a presentation who's going to show you such a crappy picture of their orchard. But it was something that I made a mistake on. So if I were doing this over again, which is the whole point of what I'm trying to get, is that I would not do 10,000 trees in the first year when I know nothing. The reason I was trying to get as many trees as I could is because I'm 56 years old, I'm not getting any younger, and these trees take time to grow and produce apples. So I wanted to get as many as I could. I wanted 14,000 total. The most I could get from the nurseries I was dealing with ended up being 10,000 trees. So that was my first year. I had things I had to figure out. I had inexperienced high school kids. We probably weren't the most efficient, but I was struggling. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, the kids that I recruited from my high school, they were all in marching band, and they were all going to college to be in marching band. So even when you're a freshman, you go a little bit earlier than everybody else. But when you're in marching band, you really go earlier. So my last day for my kids was August 4th. And I was out there on July 20th still pounding posts. And I had to run the wires. I had to put these leader poles up. I had to put anchors in the ground and get the twisted wire down from the end post. I still had the entire trellis to build, and I only had 2 weeks left. Luckily, after pounding posts, this other stuff goes real fast. So I did get it all done, but while I was stressed with all that, I did not mow, I did not spray. I have weeds like crazy in here. You can barely see the trees for all my weeds. And that created an environment for voles. So I highly recommend that you stay on top of it. You don't get a mess like this. This was my next year, which you can see is a little bit better. I wanted to show you that I did learn something. So I'm spraying between, along the rows so the trees don't have the weeds growing up. I am mowing. It doesn't necessarily look like it. And another couple things on this picture I wanted to point out. Here's my numbers. You need row numbers. Otherwise, you'd never know where you are in the orchard. I just use cattle tags. They're cheap, and they're readily available everywhere, and they work really well. So that's what I used for the row numbers. And the other thing I wanted to show you on this one, what I'm doing, this is August of this last year, I am tying these trees. So these are those little sticks that you saw going into the ground in spring of 2017. In August of 2018, they are much more trees, and they have little branches, and I am tying the little branches to the trellis. This row has been tied. You can see it's a little bit tighter than this row where the branches are still sticking out all over, and that's the next one to be tied. So that's going to be something you do the next year. That's not really part of the presentation, but I wanted to show you what it could look like. Earlier, those were numbers to work with, budget numbers. This is my actual numbers. So the only number on here that I'm estimating is my labor for this summer. All these others, I've got all the supplies already. All these are fixed numbers, 14,000 trees, approximately 14 acres. I ended up with a cost of $28.5 an acre. Hopefully, you don't have this top line is something that I had to deal with to get all those trees removed from my space. You may not have that. If you can take $24,000 off this budget, that would be great. But that gets you, that's here on your handout and everything too, that gets you the actual expenses that it cost me to get this started. And then that's what it ended up looking like. So I spent 3 years planning, getting ready, and then building, and I've got trees all over, and if an idiot like I can do that, then anybody in this room can do that. So that is all that I wanted to walk you through. That's what I did. It's all on your sheet. If you have any questions, you can grab me during a break, or if you've got quick ones now. But I really do hope that I can come back and tell you how I'm doing 4 years from now and see that the Village Idiot actually has apples coming and is making a little bit of money, I hope. Yeah, questions? Okay, deer and voles was the question. What do you do to protect them? So right now, I'm not doing anything to protect the trees from deer except hunt. So let me see if I can't. Well, that can kind of do it. I have 40 acres of pine trees that is a perfect deer habitat, and it's right next to my orchard. And so the deer have not yet been a problem. And it may be because I've just got little sticks in the ground. I don't know. Haven't had apples yet either, and I'm sure the apples are going to attract them. I've gone out and talked to some other orchardists, and they say that deer don't like these high-density orchards on trellis, that they don't like feeling closed in. Yeah, that they're going down a pathway. Now, I will say I have put in 12-foot rows. These this first year were 10 feet apart, so you have a row here. The space in between the rows is 10 feet. I do see deer in my 12-foot rows. So the 10-foot rows may actually be tight enough that the deer don't feel comfortable. I don't know, but I have not had deer problems, and I've got a lot of deer. We got 4 deer this hunting season out of my pine trees. So there's deer on my land. I haven't had any issues. The voles, first year was terrible. I lost a little bit over 100 trees to voles the first winter. But yeah, the mowing is really critical. The hawks do a good job. I did have somebody recommend trying to bring some snakes in as well, but I've got snakes out there. Both bull snakes and garter snakes are all over my orchard. And so I think that this year, with my better management, that my voles are much more under control, and I'm not expecting as much damage. Any other questions? I'm so just north of Iowa City. Yes. Okay. So irrigation, I think, is the question, right? Yeah. So very, very good question. I'm doing cider apples, so I am not irrigating. There will be some very dry years when the fruit might have very little juice, but kind of like wine and stuff, usually those dry years tend to produce a higher quality of juice. You don't get as much volume, you get a higher quality. Don't know if that's going to work as well in the cider thing, but I am not irrigating. That did bite me this year. You know, we had a very, very late spring. I was putting the next set of trees into the ground on May 7th, and then from basically the day I planted until the end of June, there was almost no rain. We had 90-degree heat in May, and so I planted 2,200 trees this last year. I lost 438 to drought. It's kind of, you can't control the weather is where I'm at, but I am not doing any irrigation. I'm sorry? No, not the way I did it. So I did not do any kind of watering of those new trees. I stuck them in the ground and let Mother Nature do its job. Yeah. So yes. So what again? I'm looking forward to maybe learning something here and everything. This one is still a good picture for that. So before I prune, so this is August, I am tying first, and I'm tying the branches that I think are the ones I want to keep. So there are still, like you can see kind of here, there's some sticking out and everything. And then all the leaves are gone now, but here in January, I've been going out and pruning now. But yes, I am pruning them to basically create a hedge tree that will grow along my trellis. Yes? Yes. All right. So this is a much more complex spreadsheet than what this slide shows, and everything. I did not have a line in there for replanting. Instead, I was kind of saying, well, I'm going to lose some, and I'll just kind of take that as a loss in my business plan. And that was not right, because obviously I am going to replace those trees that died. I've just got too many gaps in the orchard. So I am going to go back and do that. That was not part of my original financial plan. And it probably would be a good addition to your planning. You are going to have trees died. Do you want to replace them? The other part of your question, kind of, hey, Mike, where do you get your money to do this? I'm not taking out any loans or anything. One reason why I'm the village idiot is that I did grow up in Iowa. When I was 18, I hightailed it out of here and went to New York City and ended up going to college there. I started a business on the East Coast, and I came back in 2015 to do this, but I sold my business. And so I had money already lined up to invest in my orchard. And so that's a privilege that I've got, is I don't have to be dealing with debt on this. Okay, so that's the next phase of my business plan. I am building a building right now where I will juice my apples on site, and I plan on fermenting on site. It's only this is as big as I'm going, 14,000 trees. So it's not going to be a ton of juice or hard cider at the end of the day. This is going to be a little niche thing. I hope to be able to sell it to Hy-Vee. That's kind of my idea. Yes. 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 So if you couldn't hear the question, it's basically, so the trees that you ordered, what did you tell the nurseries so that you didn't get just anything they wanted to throw at you? I did tell them that I wanted dwarf stock. There were some semi-dwarfs that got sent to me as well. That was one thing that was an education for me. What you order from the nurseries and what they ship you are two different things. I didn't expect that. But they do, Cummins was the worst. So I ordered from, I think I've got them on the list. No, I don't. That's all supplies. On the list that's on the table, I've got the nurseries and everything. Cummins in New York took, I don't know if they just, I had told them, I want cider apples on dwarf stock, but I'll take anything you've got. I'm not particular. So they called me and said, well, to get to your number of trees you want and everything, we want to give you a few semi-dwarf rootstocks, and they stuck with the cider varieties, but they were kind of all over the place, and it was nothing like my order, nothing at all, and stuff. So I have like 68 varieties. I only ordered, I think, like 18. So Cummins just kind of threw everything at me. But in the cider apple world, there's all kinds of varieties that nobody's ever heard of. But I got like 6 or 7 trees of some varieties in my orchard, and we'll see how that works. But I did not. I did specify cider variety, dwarf, and that was it. I've got a whole bunch of rootstocks as well. They're not all Bud Nines. There's a bunch of Geneva ones as well. So it is a variety, and that actually I think is good. I like the diversity in my orchard for disease reasons and stuff. I don't know yet. My first apples will be coming this fall. What they say in the books and everything about my apples, I have some early ones that should be coming, might be ready for harvest already by the 3rd week of August or so. The grand majority of them will hit in early October. That will be when the majority of the apples will come in. I've got some late ones that will hang until November, possibly mid-November. But I don't know that that's necessarily going to be the case. So I guess to follow on that question, well, I guess I didn't know where my picture was. The trees You saw that they arrived kind of in these boxes in no particular order whatsoever. I guess part of orchard layout, I had planned on putting them in bloom time order, because you have sprays that you want to do before they bloom, and then there's some sprays after they bloom. So bloom time is kind of a driver for activity in your orchard, and so I wanted to get early bloomers together, mid bloomers together, and everything. So I spent a lot of time, effort, and energy organizing this mess that kind of got delivered to me into a thing that then went into the ground in bloom time. And then the next spring came. This is actually the first spring, but the next spring came when I wanted to spray and everything, and they bloom whenever they want to bloom. So I'm assuming the same is going to be true of harvest. They're going to be ready when they're ready, and I'll just keep picking them when they're ready. But check back with me, as my last slide said. Check back with me in 4 years, and I might have a better answer for you on that. Yeah. No, it was 2015 when I started doing research and measuring out the land and everything. I made the decision I was going to do a cider orchard in 2014, but I was still in the midst of selling my business back on the East Coast at that time. So 2015, I was finally here in Iowa and doing that. And those trees went in 2017, the ones that are in these pictures. With that, I think I want to pass it over to Steve, because I don't want to take too much time. But I do thank you, and I hope that this was somewhat helpful. And I do hope that Steve tells you how it really should be done, because I'm going to be taking notes as well. Thanks a lot.
My name is Steve Lewis. I'm from Oakwood Fruit Farm in southwest Richland, in southwest Wisconsin. And the good thing about it is I'm over 100 miles from home, so that makes me an expert. So we're good. Little background, I grew up on an orchard and a dairy farm in southwest Wisconsin. If you draw a line between Madison and La Crosse in Wisconsin, we're right between them, right in the middle. 180 acres of apples, 25 varieties, mainly McIntosh, Cortland, and Honeycrisp. Quickly moving to the new varieties now that are coming out, some club varieties. Fourth generation, family has owned the farm for 115 years. Graduated from UW-Madison with degrees in dairy science and horticulture. When I first came back, my love was dairy science. That's what I really thought I was going to spend most of my time with. My grandfather, he was one of the ones that first started planting apples. When we first started, we were a nursery, and there was lots of small orchards and around. A lot of farmsteads, had apple trees and had a little bit of fruit and everything, so we sold to them. As that business started going away, we just started planting the nursery stock, and that's how we grew into an orchard. He was one of the first ones to start planting semi-dwarf trees. We still have about 100 acres of semi-dwarf trees left, mostly M7 and M26. Mostly staked and planted on 10 by 18 or 8 by 16 spacing. Over the years, we've shrunk those spacings. We were slow to convert to high density and super spindle. We were too comfortable and too set in our old ways. We knew how we were doing things, and we liked those ways. And one of the biggest things was with the dairy farm, we used a lot of equipment back and forth, which we thought made us efficient. We can use those tractors in both places. We didn't have to have separate machinery for both ones. And I remember I had a horticulture professor when I was in school said that those big tractors are the most expensive equipment you have. And he didn't mean when we bought them. He meant that when we were using them. We were planning our orchard around that equipment. And that's the exact opposite of what you want to do. Get your equipment to work in the orchard. So big mistake with those, costs us a lot of money, a lot of production, and a lot of labor. And the big thing was production. So we started moving into this the dwarf trees and still planting them the old ways because we wanted to use the old equipment. Lots of wasted space. We also didn't like the idea of building fence, building trellis. That just seemed just weird, So we're going to put this orchard up. We're going to build all this fence and all this wire, spend all that money. We couldn't get that through our head. So we started baby steps. When you have a father and grandfather that have been in the business for 75 years, and you start pushing trees down, they'll just stand there and shake their head and look back and forth, and, this isn't going to work. You can't plant trees that close. The best thing is to do is send them to town to get some piece of equipment or some supplies till you have it done, and then there's nothing they can do about it. So a lot of wasted space waiting for trees to fill in that space. You know, if they're 6 feet apart, it takes them a lot longer to fill that in than if they're 3 feet. And then, so now it's 3 by 12, and this is all we do. We're 3 by 12. Probably won't move any closer because we're on real hilly ground, and we want a little bit of room, wiggle room. This last fall, we really saw it. We had 28 inches of rain during harvest time, you know, you get yourself into a little bit of trouble. So we're going to leave it at 12 feet. We thought about moving it to 11, but 12 is where we're more comfortable, just so, you know, if we have a little more wiggle room, it helps out a lot. We have a few multi-liter trials going in. I really like them. I've been on some tours where we saw them. The biggest thing is trying to get nurseries to get you a multi-liter nursery stock. It's almost impossible. And we're talking to a lot of nursery guys. It's really hard to get even growth. So you can take a whip and cut that off in your first year and try and bring up a multi-liter, but it's really, really hard to get them to grow even. And so that's been the biggest challenge that we've seen from that. I would like to do more of it because by doing that, you can have less stock, you know. So instead, if we're going 1,000 trees per acre, if we do a multi-liter, we can go to 500 and then split them. So it takes your cost down. But you're going to add at least 1, probably 2 years in your growing, and then to get that even, you know, nice, where if you buy quality nursery stock and just plant them closer. So we've got some trials and working on some things, and we'll see how it goes. So if you're starting out on a new site, things to consider. How well drained your soils are, if you've got wet spots, if you're wet altogether. Then the next thing is good air drainage. For frost, we've had areas of higher elevation that we've frozen out, you know, and right across the road there was lower elevation. But if you've got air drainage and they can move out, that's something to consider. So it's not always being in the highest spots. It's just make sure your air can drain out. And so we've had places where we've got a lot of farm fields around where we had open fields that air could drain across, and we were fine. In our higher elevation stuff, we had some woods or we had some trees or something there, and the air just got there and piled up and sat there. So think about that. So if you have not had previous orchard, you don't have to worry about replant disease. So in some of the places we've had, we're going back in the 4th and 5th time replanting now, and this is a huge deal for us, the replant disease. Soil test pre-plant, you want to go in there and make sure, you know, work with a crop consultant. You might have to, if you don't have a lot of that expertise in your area, you might have to talk to some in other areas, but, you know, test your soils and do all that. It's a lot easier to do it before you plant than try and come back in after you plant and add those things in. Look at the soil health, too. For us, you know, when we're going back in and replanting, that's a good time to add organic matter. Typically what we do with our dairy farms, so we've got that available to us. We're going in the winters and putting that stuff on, putting manure and things like that. We like to get as much as we can with organic matter, so straw or corn fodder or things like that mixed in at that time. We don't do any of that during the growing season, and that's for food safety concerns. You know, so if you have any food safety plans or things like that, none of that. From the time we take bud break on, we're not putting anything, you know, any kind of manure or anything like that on. So that all goes in from the fall to the winter to the spring. So, and then look for your ability to irrigate. If you can do irrigation, and I'll kind of tell you what we do. You know, a lot of places will have very big irrigation wells. We're not able to do that. So if you're going in an orchard replant, try and wait a couple of years to be able to, you know, level your ground back up. You take that out, a lot of roots in there. You know, put on your organic matter before planting, plant some cover crops in there. You know, kind of get the one of it is kind of get a lot of those organisms that are giving you trouble in your replant disease to get those out of there. Saying that, we don't do this much anymore, because we're in a very aggressive state in our replanting. We had quite a few years where we didn't replant a lot. Now I've put us on a 5%. So I figure 20 years. We're going to renew everything in 20 years. So we're trying to plant 5% every year. So that's putting on us, you know, we're planting on a typical year anywhere between 10 and 12,000 trees every year. And so we're trying to turn these old orchards as fast as we can. So we're not leaving it because a lot of it has to do with some of the varieties we want to get into. We want to try and get in as quick as we can. We don't want to wait 2 years. But some of the new rootstocks have really helped us out in that. Drain tile any wet areas when you have the chance. Do that before you plant. It's a lot easier. It's almost impossible to do after you've got the trellis and the trees up. So we're doing that. Soil test. Put on any lime, anything that your consultant tells you to do that. That's really easy to do when the trees are gone. If there have been any frost events, you might consider a frost fan or remove those barriers. We don't have any frost fans. We're long and stretched out, so we don't think we can get the benefit from them if we're in square blocks. But where we are, we're very hilly. We have very, very few square blocks. If you have much deer pressure, put a deer fence up. We have 180 acres fenced in, all 8 foot, and this can be, I know last time when we looked at it, it was approaching about $18,000 an acre to deer fence it. And the last semi-dwarf planting we put in before the deer fence, we never picked a bushel apples off of it. The deer completely kept that cleaned out. They kept that everything chewed off, where they never even blossomed. So we will not plant without having the deer fence. We have 8 foot deer fence around everything. And if we're expanding into our dairy farm, first thing we do is put the deer fence up before we do, because they just can do so much damage in such little time that we don't think you can go without it. Layout. Pick the type of layout that works for what you're doing. There's not a one-size-fits-all. That's one thing if I can tell people, there's lots of things they talk about, tall spindle, 2D, 3D, all this stuff. But you have to think what works out for you, what you want your orchard to be, what's your end game with it. So think about that, and you might incorporate several different things. But don't get caught up in this that, well, this is what it says, this is what that speaker said, it's got to be exactly like this. Think about what you're going to do. Are you doing pick your own? If you're doing pick your own, I've been in a lot of tours lately where they're going to a much shorter pedestrian orchard, 8 feet tall, moving the rows a little closer. But, in a lot of these places we're talking these super high densities, the land values and the pressure is much higher than us. And we've felt that, we probably don't have to get to those 12 and 1,800 trees and trying to get to that, 100 box or 100 ben per acre returns. And so if you're going to pick your own, you want to go shorter, I think that's absolutely fine. You might want a more traditional looking orchard. I know that people that they don't, for pick your own and people coming in, they don't want to have all that wire. And so they want to go to more posts and wooden posts or metal posts, and that's fine. Just make sure you're building it right. We're more commercial, so our biggest goal is we want to maximize production and labor. And the last one's the biggest one. Labor for picking and pruning is becoming more expensive and harder to get, so we want to make sure we're maximizing everything to get our benefits out of that. Layout, how will you plant, north, south? I hear that all the time. Honestly, that's one of the last things I consider. I figure everything else out how I want it. If I can go north, south, I do. For ours, we can't do it because of the terrain. We can't go north and south and be going up and down hills. We just will have a tremendous amount of erosion. So we usually orient it, however, we always have to plant around the hills for ours. And so we'll lay it out for that, what we can maximize for planting our trees. Like I said, the biggest thing, if we go up and down, when we were just doing stakes, we could follow the contour exactly. But you can't do that on trellis because things have to be straight line. So sometimes we block them up in a little more, or we just change our orientation. If you're planning pick your own, do you want your layout to be for varieties throughout the season? Maybe you want to say, okay, my early ripening varieties are here, and as I go through the season, I can progress through it. Because everybody knows if you have your whole orchard out there and you tell the customer the first 3 rows are ready, you open the gate, they just run like they're, a dog that's been let out of the house. They're going to go wherever they want. So at least if you have it laid out where you can section that off, it'll help you out. If you're planning, consider pollination. On a lot of bigger orchards where we've gone to, we used to always do, 2 or 3 rows of one and 2 or 3 rows of another. Now we're planting in big blocks. And so we have to worry about pollination, for your cross-pollination. So we might put pollinator trees in there, or, we might try and orient with a block near there that we think we get pollination from them. I tell you, one little trick that I've come up with is you're always going to lose a few trees, the first year planting. And so I have not gone to ordering pollinators. They always say 10%. What I've done now is I'll order 10%, but I'm not planting pollinators as I go. I'll plant that block solid. I'll come in the next year, and where my trees have died, I'll throw a pollinator in then. Because I'll guarantee you, whenever I do that, I never have a pollinator die. It's always my variety, my high-priced variety. So that's kind of saved me a little bit. I can come back in. It's easier to get a hold of pollinators, too. But it always happens where you do that, and, you lose some trees in there, and I can just slap a pollinator back in there. And if you, if you don't and you think you want pollinators, you can squeeze pollinators in pretty easy at the end of the row and other places like that. You want them skinny and tall anyway, so I always squeeze them in afterwards now. This kind of just shows you how we're oriented along as the hill comes down. This is a new planting we put in last year. So we just kind of go with the roll of the hill. We can't go north and south on this, would be crosswise on here, and it'd just be a disaster, especially on the other end where it gets pretty steep. The biggest thing now is picking your engine. What I would say the rootstocks you use, in my opinion, this is where the biggest mistake is made, and this is where we've made our biggest mistakes. Things to consider. Is it a new planting or a replant? If it's replant, you got to make sure you're using those new disease-resistant, replant-tolerant rootstocks. Soil drainage and fertility. Some rootstocks do not like wet soil, and it's a real big issue. Your winter temps. Most of the new rootstocks that are out there, have been bred from programs that will tolerate the winter temperatures. There's a few of the Genevas that have kind of gone through testing, but they're probably not, like some of these old diehards. We think they're going to be pretty good, but some of the very newest ones haven't been checked yet. Fire blight. Make sure if you've got a fire blight prone variety on the top, you're really watching the rootstock below, so we don't have issues with that. And then what varieties you're going to put on top. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing there either. If you put Honeycrisp on Bud 9 or some of these really little ones, Honeycrisp doesn't like to grow a lot. You're going to have a lot longer time getting that to fill its space in, and maybe even filling its space in ever. Talk to other growers in your area or in regions similar to yours and see what works there or for you. That's one of the best things, Don't be afraid to try new ones on a small scale. Put a few in. We always are doing that, and we hear some of these ones coming. From this, you should get 2 or 3 rootstocks that will work in your area, and then you can use those in your combinations. Maybe if you've got a wetter spot on your farm, maybe if you've got a certain combination, on this rootstock, we put, if we've got a little bit more vigorous varieties, go on this rootstock, and the ones that need a little more push, go on something that's got a little bit, bigger rootstock. Plan ahead 2 to 4 years. I'm 4 years out. I work with the nurseries. I get my rootstock. I reserve my rootstock. So I've got rootstock reserved for 2022. And I just say, give me, for us, 7,000 of this and 3,000 of that, 5,000 of this. I'll usually order 2,000 or 3,000 more than I want. With the way it is right now, the rootstock demand in the country I've never seen it as strong as it is. It always used to be able to come in the spring, and the nurseries are sending flyers and everything, trying to make deals. Those days are gone. It's, they're planting so many more trees now, and there's such demand with some of these new varieties coming. Plan ahead. They're happy to let you cancel a rootstock order because they've got a waiting list. So you can get that and kind of put that in your pocket and do those things, and you have it. That way because in my, if you take anything away from this, is pick the right rootstock. That's huge. And then know your customer for varieties. Okay? Plant what they'll buy. Make sure if it'll grow in your area. Some of these might not. Some of them might be winter temperatures. Some of it might be they won't get ripe in time. Some of these varieties, like Pink Lady and that, in our area, that'd be November 20th. Well, I tell you, there's not very many years I want to bet on picking apples November 20th without a hard frost. If you're a retail, so we have a retail market too. And we have real nice business with that. So we kind of almost have 2 divisions. We'll plant some of these new varieties that we don't know are going to make it commercially for our retail, because you can take the time to educate the consumer coming there. And they come there and they want to learn new things. They want to try new things. They're not doing that at the grocery store. 90% of our business is wholesale at the grocery store. So, retail, pick your own. You can try new varieties. If you're commercial, you really have to know what they want and what they're going to buy. Because nothing's worse than if you plant a whole bunch of them and you got 5,000 or 6,000 bushel at the end and you don't know what to do with them. Make sure you put the right combinations together. Weaker growing varieties need to have a little more horsepower on them so they get up and fill their space. Watch fire blight prone varieties. You don't have to stay away from them, but know what they are when you put them in so you know you're watching them, because the first 3 years are about the worst. That's where the most catastrophes happen, because their vigor, they're really, really growing and filling the space in, and I tell you, you can have a train wreck in a hurry. More vigorous varieties need to have smaller rootstocks to stay within your growing systems. Pruning can help this. I know some guys that'll say I can take a semi-dwarf, an M7, M26, and I can fit it into a 3 or 4 foot space. You can, but you better really know what you're doing and know when to do it. And if you have not got a lot of experience in that, I probably wouldn't push it right away. Rootstocks. If you don't know me and you haven't been around, this is really my passion. This is one of the things I really like. I really do a lot of research, and I'm always looking for the new ones on these. Geneva 11 for us works on most everything. Now, granted, we're in replant. We're almost 100% replant, and so it's done great for us. It's very consistent, very productive, has lots of branches. You would think, oh, all trees have lots of branches. Not true. These have a lot of branches, more consistently branched, and flatter angles on the branches. Nick 29 is a good one too. It grows, it'll really fill its space in. It's not as fire blight resistant. G11, some will say it's somewhat replant resistant and somewhat fire blight resistant. In our areas, it's definitely replant resistant, and it's as good at fire blight as I've seen on anything. So those can change from regions to region, but from what we've seen on our place, it's been great. Watch the bitter pit. So if you're putting this in on Honeycrisp, it bitter pits much more than other varieties, and you can see it. You drive right down the row from one side to another, you can see it driving by. If you can see it driving by, it's a big deal. Geneva 41, it really grows. We like it. It's very popular around the country. I don't like it because it's very dominant branching and the limb angles. When I mean about dominant branching, so when we're renewal pruning, we're going in the winter and cutting these back, taking the bigger branches and cutting them back to a 2 or 3 inch stub. Take 4 or 5 of those dominant branches out. I'll come back the next year, and just about everyone will have thrown this beautiful new branch right where I wanted to, and it's 3 foot long again. And it hasn't put, the idea is you cut that out and it grows back slowly, but it'll put other branches in other places of the trees. Geneva 41 really tends to seem to favor those ones that are there. And the problem with that is it makes it really hard to fill the top of the tree in. 935 really grows. It's, kind of a lot of people are saying this is the answer on some of these weaker growing varieties, Honeycrisp and that. We've got very good soils in our area, and I think it might be too vigorous. And I didn't think I'd ever say that, because when these guys are telling us we're going to plant these things and we're going to be in full production in 3 or 4 years, they're crazy. That's what I thought. We had Geneva 935, and we had at the top, on Honeycrisp, we had top wire in the second year, ready to go. Problem is they hadn't filled the top of the tree in. They were up there and above it, and pretty big branches in them. And so I think it's just going to be a little bit too vigorous for us. If I couldn't get anything else but 935, it's okay, but you better start pruning it hard early and stay on it, because it's really going to be one that's going to fill things in. Bud 9, that's kind of the standard around the country. Everybody loves Bud 9. I'm not a big fan. I'll show you pictures in a little bit. It's okay on new ground. We had a block we planted on some of our dairy ground that had never been orchard before, and it looks awesome. It did great. But 99% of what we're planting is replant, and it's just very inconsistent. M9337 is okay, but there's better new ones. It's just a smaller version, Nick 29. Geneva 210, Geneva 222, Geneva 214. I've heard really, really good things on 214 and 210. They're very new. We're going to have them in the ground starting this year. So check back, and I'm really excited to get on some of those. Saying that, on some of these, if you're going to put these newer rootstocks in, you really better be planning ahead because they're very hard to get, and the limited supply of them. I believe G214 was supposed to have been out about 7-8 years ago, and they've had a couple propagation problems with that. They're circling back. They think they've got that figured out. But it's really supposed to be tremendous. In that same size as the Bud 9, you know, and the bigger M9s and G11. So right here you can see. So this side, this is a replant site. Nice soils, good drainage. This side is Bud 9, and you can see, I have my pointer. But you can see on this side, you see up through here, see how it's kind of, I would say like a sawtooth. We're up and down, we're up and down. Not many of those trees are the top wire. This side is Geneva 11. Same, they're on Pizzazz, and I don't know if anybody knows Pizzazz, but that's a new club variety. It's planted the same day, taken care of exactly the same way. That's the difference. See how much fuller these trees are? We crop these trees full crop a year ahead, and these trees are, the Bud 9 are pretty nice now, but they're still not nearly as filled out, as nice a branch as what the G11 is. And those trees, like I said, they were planted the exact same day. So we see this a lot. It's very inconsistent. Height of the top wire is 9.5 feet. Mm-hmm. Yep. So. Mm-hmm. On Gala, Gala, we've got Gala in on G11. We really like it. We got to the top wire in the second year, filled in. This year they'll be full crop. I really like that. On Bud 9 works okay. Bud 9 isn't fire blight resistant, but it does put some resistance into the variety on top, which is a really weird thing. But they would work okay on that. We've stayed away. Nick 29 does real nice because on Gala we struggle with size, and Nick 29 will tend to give you, it's a little more vigorous, will give you a little more resistant or a little more size push on the top, but you have to watch the fire blight. Gala is very fire blight prone, so you could go into the ones. For us, G41 would get a little big, and you know that would be another good choice because you got fire blight resistance there. I would really lean towards G11 if you can get it. So, you know, now our favorites for varieties, Honeycrisp, all the sports. So the big thing now is Honeycrisp. We've got all the new red Honeycrisp coming through. I think we have just about every one of them in the ground right now, including Premier Honeycrisp. How many people know about Premier Honeycrisp? Have heard of it? Yeah, so Premier Honeycrisp is a new Honeycrisp. It's an early Honeycrisp. It comes 3 weeks ahead of normal Honeycrisp. So we're real excited about that. Planting a lot of Pizzazz, which is a managed club variety. So we're in the grower association for that. Gala, the new red strains. Ruby Mac, which is a redder Mac. Pink Lady, there's a couple new Pink Ladies that are 4 or 5 weeks ahead of regular Pink Lady, so we can pick them about the 15th of October. Really like those. And Crimson Crisp. Anybody, how many people heard about Crimson Crisp? Yeah, really love that apple. It's a disease-resistant apple. It's a great apple. Customers love it. If I could get someone to commit to do this commercially, we'd put 20,000 in the ground in a heartbeat. It's a great apple. But, you know, commercially, there's nobody behind it pushing it, and it's an open release. But it's a great apple. If you're not growing this one for your retail market or your pick your own, you should really look at it. It's a beautiful apple. Stores tremendously. This is Firestorm Honeycrisp. You can see that. That's, you know, they are a lot redder than the regular Honeycrisp. We really like that. We've got some Royal Red Honeycrisp in the ground too. This is Premier Honeycrisp. This last year we picked it August 15th, and it was ready. It just didn't look good. It was ready. The year before, we were late last year. The year before, we picked it August 10th, and they were ready. They ate just like a mid-season Honeycrisp. This last year, we had our first big crop of them. They came in. We had them. We packed them on, I think, the 16th of August. We packed some. I put them back in just our regular storage, so about 38 degrees. October 20th, we ran some when we were running regular Honeycrisp. They were actually better than our regular Honeycrisp. Flavor was better. They were still, the texture and the crispness was just as good. So we're really excited about this. It's not a redder Honeycrisp, though. It's earlier. Our concern was early apple, is it going to keep? And it definitely does keep. And so these were our highest pack outs all year of any Honeycrisp variety. Type of growing system. This will really determine your spacing and tree spacing. So, if you're going to, you want a, shorter, more pedestrian orchard, maybe you look at pushing things closer, because the rule is 90% of your row width. So if you're going to go 12 feet rows, you really should be looking at your trees being 11 feet high. And the reason that is if you get higher than that, you start shading. And so you follow that 90% rule. So if you're having shorter rows, you can push your trees a little closer together. If you're on flat land and you have the equipment to do it, that's fine. Maybe different, pick your own versus commercial. Maybe you want a more traditional looking orchard. You don't want all that wire and things like that. Might be different for different varieties. Some they're easier to fill their space. Type of growing system, tall spindle, renewal pruning. That's these, you don't have any really dominant permanent branches in. Central leader, where you're going to leave branches. You kind of shape them like a Christmas tree. This is what our old orchard was like. We're doing that, and now we're doing all this renewal. Multi-leader. I've seen some of these, looks really good, so we're coming up, bringing 2 trees. Basically, we've got 2 trees coming from the same stump. What I've said here, though, is I found it really hard, and talking to other guys, too, to get that consistent like that. These are probably coming from a nursery where they're doing that, and they're growing them. I don't know of any ones in the United States that do that. You might be able to get them to do custom stuff like that. And I've seen these where we're doing. I've got some trials up in here where I brought up I had a real nice tall whip, and I brought it up and laid it over on my bottom wire, and I'm bringing those up. Takes a little longer to fill your space in, though, because you've got to grow those central ones. So the rest of those trees in there are going into the 3rd leaf, and we're looking at cropping them this year. And my multi-leader ones, I'm probably 2 years away from getting those leaders up to where I want. No, these are not from our place. No. You probably have to have something that's got a little bigger horsepower on it. One thing you would decide your spacing. If I'm going to do a multi-leader and I'm going to go 5 feet or I'm going to go 10 feet, would determine, if I'm going to try and do like 4 on one side and 4 on the other off that, you'd want something more than if I'm going, 3 and 3 or something. So the bigger the space, probably the bigger the horsepower on. And you're probably looking at, mine are on Geneva 890, which is going to be similar to probably like M26 or M7. And so that's why I got a few of those, and I thought it'd be a great place to lay some of those down and see what they are. But they have not taken off and pushed like I thought they would. I thought I'd lay them down. I thought in the first year I'd get 4 of them, to shoot 3 feet apiece. No, it really slows them down when you tip that over. It'll be interesting to see now in this 3rd year once they've, kind of got dominance and got those established, and I've got those leaders coming up and supported how fast they'll fill in. Year 1, plant quality trees. Don't save money here. The smaller the tree you get, you save money, but it's going to push you off years of production. So you can say, well, am I willing to take those costs now, save money now and then not get as return early? You just kind of have to weigh those things. Not too big. Those big 3/4 inch trees. If you ever notice when you start looking around in nurseries and what they have left, they have the little trees left and the big trees left. Because those big 3/4 inch trees look great, but I'll tell you, those 1/2 inch and that next size up take off faster than the 3/4 inch tree. I think that transplant shock's a lot harder on those, so they just kind of sit in the ground and wait. Big and tall, not always the same. I've seen, 1/2 inch trees that are really big and have nice branches, and then I've seen 3/4 inch trees that don't have that. So just, don't think about that. Just because it's 3/4 inch tree is not going to mean it's great, big, tall, lots of branch trees. You can get that on a 1/2 inch tree from a quality nursery. First year, plant them early and push them hard. I know people that are planting in June. I've got my trellis built, my trees already done. That's the biggest thing. That's where we lose out on places like Washington and other places where they're talking about getting these trees into production. The later we plant them, the more stress it is on them. The 2, we're just losing the best growing time of the year, right? July and August aren't the best times to grow your tree. June's the best month to grow your tree. So get them in as early as you can. For us, what determines it, as soon as I can pull that tree planter. As soon as it gets dry enough and we can get the groundwork and get the tree planter going, that's when we're going. Cut back all these side branches to 3 to 4 inches. And the biggest thing here is if we've got these big feathered trees, those trees will want to blossom that year. And that's really hard on the tree. So those trees come out of dormancy. The first thing they do is they blossom, and that just really zaps them. It slows them down yet. And then all your fire blight. And so I've done this both ways because sometimes I'm not a real quick learner. And so I had a guy tell me this, and we went and did it one year. I did all my trees, cut them all back 3 to 4 inches on the side branch, and trees took off and did great. Next year we didn't do it, and it was a disaster. We got out there. All of a sudden we had a real wet spell when they started blooming, and they'll always do have a lot of that uneven bloom, you know, because these trees are coming out of dormancy, and they do it different. And so it's like 2 weeks that blocks in bloom. And we've done this twice. We went out and hand-picked every blossom off of 10,000 trees. And the reason is as I couldn't get in there to spray because we've got, you know, you've got ground, you don't have sod in there yet. I couldn't drive in there. And so it was better off for me to go in there and remove all that bloom and take that risk of getting fire blight out of there. So if you cut those all back, one thing is it doesn't leave you any dominant ones, and 2, it gets rid of 90% of your risk of bloom, and 3, those trees will take off faster by doing that. Do not head the leader. You leave him alone. Just that very first year, and then in the winter I'll come back and cut back any of the bigger, more dominant branches to 2 or 3 inches then. But, you know, and when we start out, when I stick them in the ground, the day after I get done planting, the guys are starting to build trellis, and I'm walking all these trees and cutting those all off. And I just go around and do every one, any of those side branches. Now, if they're really tiny, you know, the size of, you know, like swizzle stick or something like that, they're okay if they're short darts. But just remember, you know, there's a chance for some bloom to be on them too. You know, sometimes they do that. So get them out of there, and you don't have to worry about it. Wrapping them for what? That's paint. Yep, and you'll see we do wrap them. Type of support, you can do individual stakes or you can trellis. Obviously, you know, trellis, if we got high density, it's less expensive on a per tree basis. You know, we used to use all best angle stakes. You know, they're almost as much as a tree. And if you're going to do drip irrigation, you can hang it on that bottom wire. That's where I like to add another wire because I can get that down and hang it on that. We used to lay it on the ground, and rabbits and coyotes and things like that chew holes in them like you cannot believe. So we get it up there. The other thing is you can see a hole in it pretty easy. You can drive by with a four-wheeler at 20 miles an hour if it's up on there, and you can see it spraying water in the air if it's on that bottom wire. So if your individual stake, make sure it'll support the tree. One thing I don't like is it'll tend, if you have a bigger stake, it'll tend to rub a side out of that tree. And you'll see, you know, like 20 or 30 degrees of that tree doesn't have limbs growing out because that, if you tie it too loose, that it doesn't, you know, you don't have to worry about that. Then you get this wind blowing that tree back and forth around it, and it really slows it down because it's you know, it's breaking those roots loose, and you know, in the top of the soil. And it also, we've had them where those trees will be attached to that post yet, and they'll be dead because the windstorm just twisted them right around the post. So if you tie them tight enough, then you lose that. And then we've also had this. You know, the wind comes and blows them down. If you're going to do this, the very least thing I do is run a wire out across the top so that the top of those are attached to that and the individual posts can't blow over. Trellis, don't go cheap. You know, a lot of this is kind of what Mike said. The 90% rule there, so think about that. Think about if you're going to do hail netting or shade netting, then you want to be taller. We use all 12-foot posts, put them in the ground 3 feet. And then, you know, so don't get over 35 feet. Decide how many wires. And if you sit down and calculate all this stuff, the wire is the cheapest thing you're going to have. So to add one more wire, it's cheap. You know, that's the last thing. The other thing is the closer your wires are together, the easier it is to support that tree. And that's what you're trying to do. As they're growing, the quicker they get up to that next wire and you can support them and they're not waving around, the faster that will harden off and keep growing. So I like 5 wire. If I was going to do anything, I'd go to 6 before I'd go back to 4. And it's just because I like that bottom one so I can hang my drip line on it. And you can support each individual leader with wire, conduit, bamboo. I've seen it all. With 5-wire, I didn't think we needed to do it. It's one extra step. It's one extra cost. About the cheapest, we do have a section orchard where we did all conduit on it, but about the cheapest you can do it is about another $1.50 per tree. So that's why we've gone to just the 5-wire and the U-hooks. Trellis design, we can do the H-brace, which is like they do in most fences, or we can do the anchor like this. This is all we do. We're going to this year, and we're going to this double brace. So we come back to the middle of that post. That's a lot stronger. We're coming back down and get in the middle because I've seen places where that post will bowl. H-brace, and then you can do a V-trellis. I've seen this as a super high density. You're talking like 1,800 trees to the acre. A lot of infrastructure. I don't have any experience in this, and I don't want to. It looks really cool, though. The nurseries will tell you to go that way. So the H-brace, it's strong. Make sure, so we do a 9-foot tall, 9.5 tall, 5 wires, and the U-hooks to attach the tree to the wire. We've tried other things. There's rope, there's some rubber tubing. And man, if we compare anything else, we've had great luck. We've never had if you put them in correctly, never had them move, never had them let go. And I can put a lot of those U-hooks on in a day. And we've done trials where we're tying the other stuff, and it's just simple. It's easy to do. No matter what you do, you're doing an H-brace or you're doing that anchor, make sure your anchor, your end, is at least as far back as your top wire. So if you're 9 feet high, your anchor back from your back post needs to be at least 9 or 10 feet. If you shorten that up and try and save space, it drastically reduces your strength. So keep that out there. This is what we're going to this year. You can get pre-made kits. If you talk to Gripple, everybody know Gripple? Gripple makes these really neat little wire things to connect wires. They'll do these pre-made kits, and you tell them your length and what you're going to do, and they all come. And I'm not using these anchors. I don't know. I just don't like that. And one of the big things is I don't like losing those last 3 trees. If that's 9 feet back, right, that's 3 trees space. So we're going to do a double post. And so my last one's going to come down around a regular big post here and then go back up. And then I'm just going to put some wires between those last 2 posts, not pull them up tight, just kind of pull them hand tight so I can support my last 3 trees. So there's not going to be really pulling on that post or pulling on top of that post, but I don't want to lose those 3. If I do, I figured this year it'd be 350 trees we'd lose on our planting by taking those away. And so we're going to try that and see how it goes. And I got 5 minutes, so I got to go. Irrigation. Most will say it's a necessity with high density. You might get away with it if you've got real fertile soils and heavy soils, but if you've got varieties that don't like to size up, I would say it's essential. I would say it's essential anyway. We have to go 650 feet just to get a 30-gallon-a-minute well, and nobody would consider that even close to being an irrigation well. So we use house wells. We've got, between all of us, between our dairy farm and my family that lives on the farm, we've got 6 house wells, 10 to 15 gallons a minute. That's not much. But we're setting tanks, and then we irrigate in zones. So we come out, we go into these tanks, we have a float on them, we just let them fill overnight. And then the next morning they're filled up, and then we irrigate that zone. We try and have it set up so I can get back around to each zone at least every 4 days. So twice a week I can get water on them. 2,500 to 5,000 gallon tanks. So we've got gas and electric pumps set up there depending on. I like to use electric, but a lot of these places might be clear out in the orchard. And I have places where we don't even have a well, but I'm running nurse tanks. So we've got a place in the back where we dug a bigger well, and then we haul water to these other places, and then we just set a gas pump. Drip line on the bottom works great. You get those little twisty ties. They're just cut up irrigation line. You put them on there. They're super cheap, and you just wrap them around there, and they hold it right up on there. It works great. We run 2-inch line, and then we branch off with 1.5 inches. Irrigate slow and long. So we're trying to put on about 5 gallons per tree per irrigation cycle. And so our emitters are about 0.5 gallon. So we're running anywhere between 9 and 10 hours when we're running them. We try and have it set up. Our emitters are 2 feet apart, so they're typically in between each tree. That way, when they're at that time, you get these figure eights will just about touch each other and just about fill in. Now, that's going to be different for different soil types. Ours is heavier soil. If you get sandier soil, your figure eight's not going to be as big. Protection. If you have high pressure from rodents, you better be putting something on them. Most of your damage will come in the winter, under the snow. You won't know it's there until the next spring, and this is what it'll look like. So we put, every tree gets a tree guard on them. We've tried a couple different tree guards. That goes on in the spring. First thing we do is you see we paint the trunk. That's for southwest injury in the winter. You get that heating up of that south side of the tree and cooling down. Some varieties are a little more prone to it than others. But we put that around there. We've got a couple different ones that we try. I don't like that spiral one. You know, a lot of them you'll see that spiral one. Those will girdle the trees, believe it or not. We've had a lot of them. We've girdled them. We've taken them off. And I don't like them. If you watch them, too, they'll get gaps in there. And then it's not a mouse guard. It's a mouse house. And so we've gone away from those. These are plantra, and they come out of Minnesota. And we really like them a lot. They're like a corrugated plastic. They'll probably last about 6 or 7 years. I'm switching to a new one this year that's actually perforated. And they're a little taller. And so by doing that, I think we can get away from painting them. Yes, absolutely. One winter we had a beautiful block of Honeycrisp and Gala that we'd put in, and they were about 5 years old. Just got to beautiful full production, and we used to use these wire tree guards, and we had a bunch of new plantings. So we went around that summer. You know, the trees were as big around as my arm. We were around that summer. We pulled all those tree guards off to move them to another block and reuse them. Hey, we're going to be smart, save a lot of money. We had about 1,200 that winter that we come back in and we're pruning in March, and they had them girdled completely around. So we went in and in-arch grafted them. I got rootstock and planted them beside them and then grafted them in. And we were able to save about 95% of those trees, but it was a lot of work. So this is, that tree guard we can get for about 37 to 40 cents a tree. If you get it wrong, you can always top work them over. And we've done this, a wrong variety, or so you can take that in, go in the spring, leave a couple nurse branches, cut them off, put your sign wood in there, make sure you're paying the royalties. And then we had this. This was a black variety we didn't like, and we wanted to top work it over. And we had them planted a little too far apart, so we put 3 on every one, hoping we'd get 1 or 2. Well, about 90% of them we got at least 2, so we brought 2 up in a V. And so now we're 2 by 4. 2 by 12 spacing, and you can see this was at the end of their first year. And you can see, you know, because they've got that rootstock in there, and you can see we brought them up, we're V'ing them, we're filled them in. Last year was their second year. They filled in great, and this year they'll be full production. We've got over, and I did the other half of the block the next year. I wanted to see the first year how it would go. So in conclusion, pick your growing system, kind of determine on what your end game is going to be. Pick your rootstocks. I think this is the biggest thing. Plan ahead, order, match the varieties, and then pick your varieties. You know your customer and what you're going to can sell. So I have like a minute. Any questions? We like crab apples because when our pickers are going through there, an apple's an apple to them. So if I put another variety in there, inevitably some get mixed in. And so I try and stay with pollen, crab apples or something that's totally different looking. We have not, just because. To go back, there's a lot of work, watching all those graphs, and with the operation of our size, it's hard to go back in those individual trees. If I've got a whole block that I know I'm concentrating on, then we do. I think I have one more slide here. Okay. Keep trying and learning, plan ahead. Don't forget about them late season. A lot of mistakes are made. We get them going, and we get into that time of season where harvest is, and we forget about them. I've seen some disasters happen there. Make sure those trees are healthy going into the fall. I've seen some really wet falls where these trees got stressed and they looked terrible, and the next spring they came back and we had some losses, so don't forget about them then. Try new things, try new varieties. Any other quick? No, just the problem is making sure that raised bed stays raised. So if we've hilled them up, I have had it where we planted them when we didn't get them the depth we wanted, and I went through and tilled the soil and plowed them over and got it to the depth I wanted for my leader. That's a big thing everybody knows when you're planting. You got to keep your graft union above the soil. And you can compensate some of the height on your tree by leaving that graft union up a little higher will make the tree a little smaller. But I don't know how I can make sure that that doesn't get down too far, you know, through erosion or runoff. And all of a sudden, instead of 2 or 3 inches, I'm 6 inches, and now my tree is really dwarfed down. That's what worries me about that. Mm-hmm. A lot of the Genevas have done a lot better. You know, the M9s, in my opinion, are the worst for that, where we've seen our biggest problems on the soils. And a lot of that, when you see those trees I showed you, the Bud 9 and M9, some of that's replant, but some of that is also a little bit lower places in those spots where it just stays a little wetter, and they really struggle in those things. Yep. Yeah, I would say it's a really, really slow-growing tree. It's real similar to Honeycrisp, and so we've got it on a little more vigorous rootstock when we first put it in. It'd be really interesting to go. We don't have it on any high-density stuff, so it'd be really interesting to see it on high-density stuff where you kept them cut back and you know, had the more renewal stuff. But I would say it probably will tend to do that if you're not doing renewal pruning and you leave it there, it will do that. Mm-hmm. Oh, there's, you know, through the course of the season, we're on a really high-level IPM thing, and so we've actually got a third-party group that comes in that certifies some of the things we can and can't use. But that would change throughout the course of the season and through that. I'm real hesitant to throw out specific names on things like that. We can talk afterwards on that. But that'll change from year to year. It'll change from pressures. And one thing I would encourage, especially if codling moth is a big thing, is to go to mating disruption. A lot of people have had very good luck with mating disruption on codling moth. Yep. I think technically we're 5A now, I think, is the new ones, right? You know, a lot of that has, you know, I think our winter temperatures and that are changing. You know, we're definitely getting, you know, seeing less severity. This whole game of agriculture, a lot of it has to boil down to your risk tolerance. You know, so if it's a variety you really like and you really want, you know, maybe put some in. You know, you might go 15 years, you might go 5 years, you know, on some of that stuff. I think it just has to come down to with how much risk you're willing to do. And if it's a really, really good variety that you really want, I would still try it. I just wouldn't hang my cornerstone on that.